Welcome to the Irish NFL show. It is Trick or Treat weekend. We're previewing the Week 8 games. No buys this week, so that's a treat for all NFL fans because all 32 teams are in action this weekend. Among the marquee matchups coming up are Rams at Cowboys and Bengals at Niners. And those indeed are the two live games being screened this Sunday at Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. Buskers also screens Red Zone live every NFL Sunday. And there's a new offer every Sunday, all pints €6 from 6 p.m. Of course, this week that's 5 p.m. with the clocks turning back and the earlier starts for the games. And a reminder that the Irish NFL show will be coming to you from, or will be dropping into Buskers rather over the weekend to record some extra special Halloween weekend content. We will update you on that very soon. Now, the Bills host the Bucs in Buffalo in the Thursday night football game. Brian and Andrew Morgan preview that game in our TNF podcast. Our first section of game previews and picks, though, is brought to you by RuPoint, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. And you can see how RuPoint can help your business at rupoint.com. And we start this weekend with what game do we have? Falcons at Titans. Colin, Will Levis, of course, in for the Titans this weekend. An interesting twist of fate there. How do you see this one going?
Yeah, this is I like for the Titans. It's about finding out what they have, but you can't say that Will Levis comes into it with a ringing endorsement. In that his head coach was kind of. It almost felt like this was going to be flip a coin. Is it going to be Malik Willis or Will Levis? And ultimately, they've gone with the second round pick. We're going to have to see how he does. I think the big question really though on this one is for the Falcons, can they find a way to get out of their own way? Their defense, we talked about it on Tuesday, has been really, really good. They have taken a major step forward, and it is the issues. Desmond Ridder, 3 fumbles last week, each kind of more hilarious than the last. I'm down here in Cork for the weekend, and I was thinking, Arthur Smith on the sideline, it kind of a bit like Graham Norton, a famous Corkonian, and he pulls the many faces when he has his guests telling their stories on the couch. I wonder what faces we'll see from Arthur Smith this weekend. I think the Titans. All the talk coming out of there is they recognize that they are in a rebuild, and while they'll continue to play hard for Vrabel, it's the Falcons who are looking to clinch their division or put a further stranglehold on it. I think that they should have enough, but that Titans D-line could cause problems.
Brian, we could end up, I guess, seeing a lot more of Will Levis, depending on how this weekend goes. If they drop to 2-5, really, they'll probably want to be preserving Ryan Tannehill and cotton wool and thinking about a trade down the line and building for next season and thinking about that draft pick.
Yeah, Colin touched on there, like the fact that it was a toss of a coin scenario. But how bad a look would it be if Will Levis wasn't to be selected for this game? Bearing in mind, for large parts of the offseason, people felt he was going to be a top 10 pick in the draft. Didn't materialize, goes in the second round. I think his girlfriend moved on from him thereafter. She was very prominent in the draft night in terms of sitting there and holding his hand, and she quickly moved him on. She must have had a deal with him. If you're not
the most prominent girlfriend in the draft since Manti Te'o.
There you go. Oh, yeah, there you go. The ghost lady. Interesting turn of events to the show already this evening. We're going down that route, but we're getting away from football here. Look, the Falcons for me should win this game. And normally I was fine with the Titans at home. I'm very keen to select them because they just have a way of winning these games that you don't expect against teams because they kind of grind it out. But right now they're in a bit of they are potentially in a rebuild, and it could get worse before it gets better because let's bear in mind the trade deadline's coming Tuesday, and they've already, took Howie Roseman must have, some very erratic photographs of other GMs in this league because he seems wrangling these fantastic deals, but they have traded away their best safety this week to the Eagles, and there is talk of them potentially moving other players for the deadline on Tuesday. So to me, it looks like the London game was kind of that kind of clinch moment in the season where they have to make a decision? Are they moving on in that particular direction of challenging, or are they going away? And if they lose this game and go 2-5, bear in mind where the Jags are in this division, and potentially the Jags winning 5 games in a row. I know we're going to come to that game shortly. Essentially, the season is going in a very different direction. I agree with you on the Falcons. Like, they're a quarterback away right now for me from being a really strong team, a really strong outfit in the NFC. Bearing in mind how open the NFC is for potential wildcard spots, I'll go Falcons. I think they have more to offer in this game. I think they'll find a way to get over the line and win this game. The only concern is bye week. Sometimes teams come off a bye week fresh, they navigate victories. But for me, Falcons.
Yeah, I got to say, I'd go along with that as well. I think we're going to have a Falcon sweep by the sounds of it. Got a good look at the Titans, as you did, Brian, when we were in London. And they played hard that week. As you say, their season was very much still alive at that point, and now it's kind of getting away from them. And even at that, I suppose, with the benefit of having seen the Ravens absolutely go to town on a very good Lions team, we now see really how good the Ravens are and that they're rounding into form. Some evidence of that against the Titans, although they weren't quite at the peak that they were last weekend's games. But the fact that the Titans hung in there for a while just shows you, the caliber that they have, and the fact that the guys, as you mentioned, play for Vrabel, but just there's not an awful lot of quality there. There's no explosion. There's no real way to get in front of teams, and unlike the Falcons, who are a Ritter replacement away from being really, really dangerous, I think this is a good opportunity for the Falcons to bounce back with a win on the road, and I see them doing that as well. Our next game is Texans Panthers. Colin, both teams coming off the bye, so we expect to see either of them cook something up. For me, and maybe I'll throw in my 2 cents first this time instead of hiding in the pocket waiting to see. For me, it's hard to kind of see past the Texans. I don't think things are going to get any better for the Panthers based on what we've seen, and the well publicized issues that Frank Reich has aired about the quarterback. It's always going to be always heading for something of a lost season for them anyway, and an eye to the draft next year. Also, of course, I'm coveting that number 1 pick, which goes to the Bears, regardless of how the Panthers do this season. But I see the Texans going in there and coming out with the W. How do you see it?
To me, this is like, do you remember, younger viewers or listeners won't remember, but Bullseye, the quiz game, look at what you could have won. And I think that is what Frank Reich is going to be thinking from the sideline. He has hinted at it. And Zach Kiefer does a great podcast for the Athletic every Tuesday, Kiefer and the Beats, where he talks to different beat writers. And they actually had Panthers beat writer on, and they were kind of discussing it. And because he would know, Kiefer would know Frank Reich from the time in Indianapolis. And basically, the feeling was that this was who Frank wanted, but that David Tepper and David Tepper's wife felt that Bryce Young was very talented and was just a wonderful face for the franchise, and that the processing test played a huge role in it. This is going off what they were saying, that David Tepper is very into analytics and very into processing. And obviously, famously, CJ Stroud did very poorly on the S2 test. Now, he said the day before the draft, I can tell you I'm smart enough to know where I should put the football on a field. And so that has proved thus far. Texans have, really surprised me. I wasn't too high on them going into this season, but D'Amico Ryans and the Texans, I think, have done a fantastic job on both sides of the ball. The Panthers and Frank Reich handing over play calling duties this early in the season. Again, that screams of, an owner wanting to force things and make things happen. I think that the Panthers should be improved coming off the bye. I think this could be, they will really want to put a statement. I'm sure Bryce Young as well will want to. But I'm going to go with you on this, Connor. I think the Texans should have enough to take care of business.
Brian, I can start to convince myself, as Colin was alluding to there, that coming off a bye and the Panthers eyeing this one, probably looking at it to a certain extent, thinking, well, if not this one, then where does our first win of the season come from? This is definitely one of the more achievable wins that they will see, and you can imagine that they will be gunning for it, but do they have enough to make that count?
I'm not necessarily sure they have enough to make it count, but sometimes coming off a bye week and having 2 weeks to essentially plan for and scheme for a game. And bearing in mind, like we're talking about scheming for the quarterback, and we're talking about CJ Stroud, they would have been scheming for this quarterback for months on end. They would have done all their homework on him in a positive way in terms of him coming into the Panthers potentially. I know obviously it went a different way in the end, but they would have had so much analysis on this guy. Surely they can find a way to navigate a performance defensively to put him under pressure, because they're going to know his weak spots. Haven't done all the study, haven't had him in for quite so many of the off-season periods where they're allowed to bring in guys and obviously do bear in mind the visits and stuff and the testing. So for me, it's a very winnable game. I think this is one of the games where they will have looked at it and said we can get over the line. You're touching on the Texans briefly. Like we're talking about Nick Caserio, who was potentially on the hook last year to be fired despite the Deshaun Watson stuff. But you look at players that they brought in, Dell, and you got Nico Collins and Pearson, Stroud. They're hitting on a lot of these draft picks now, which is a really positive sign. But he doesn't seem to be getting much of the credit. Colin talking about bullseye there, and he's talking about the prizes. Look what you could have won. But there was also a thing that used to pop into my head during bullseye. The family who won the prize would be from somewhere like Stoke, and they'd bring out a speedboat or something and say, look what you would have won. And you'd say to yourself, that doesn't make any sense. Where were they ever going to use it? Or when were they ever going to use it? This doesn't make sense.
On the River Trent, obviously, it's Stoke on Trent.
Oh, okay. They look very unusual going down the River Trent. But okay, so sometimes it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I'm going with the Panthers. I think I have a sensible reason as to why they'll win. If any team should know how to get a CJ Stroud, bearing in mind this homework they did in the offseason, it should be them. I'll go with them to get their first win in the season.
Colin, Jags at Steelers, a game I have to say I'm really looking forward to, because we learned something about both of these teams. We talked about the Steelers on Tuesday, and I was saying, look, that 4-2 record looks like it's slightly fraudulent, to put it mildly. They got two great wins in the column there against the Browns in particular, to begin with, but the Ravens in particular. Like, now looking at the form that the Ravens were in, you got to think that Steelers are blessing themselves and thanking their lucky stars that they had all those drops that week, because otherwise they'd be staring at a very different record. But they welcomed the Jags into town, who are on an absolute tear at the moment, going very well, winning games at least, although based on how they performed against the Saints, a pretty bad Saints team by the performance they put up last week, they're not exactly hitting their straps either. How do you see this one panning out?
Yeah, it's a funny one, because I wouldn't say either of these two teams have kind of hit the top gear as yet, and whether either of them will over the course of the season, there are question marks. I mean, Doug Peterson was at the podium today and was kind of talking about like Calvin Ridley, that he after week one, he has been disappointing. He's looking for more from him. Now, Dan Campbell did something similar to Jared Goff last year, and we did see a great response from Goff. Will be something similar from Calvin Ridley. I think last week was an interesting one for the Steelers, because it looked like the Rams were driving down the field. It looks like they might well put themselves 2 scores up, and then TJ Watt comes up with the interception. He was on with Kevin Clark this week, kind of talking a little bit about the way in which they're trying to utilize him. I saw a stat that there are 2 players with 70 sacks and 7 interceptions before they turn 30, and one of those is LT. And the other is TJ Watt. Now, when you are where the only other person in the building is Lawrence Taylor, you're doing something very, very, very right, because LT was absolutely incredible. So he can be a game wrecker, and that is an area where they could look to exploit a Jags O-line that hasn't been has had its ups and downs. I suppose this is one where, because it's in Pittsburgh, I think that the Steelers could do it. The Jags just have been so disjointed, and I think I'll go with the Steelers, because I think the Jags will have other games where they'll actually surprise. But I think the Steelers match up quite well with them in this one.
Yeah, I have this funny, and of course I would say this, wouldn't I? But the Steelers have this odd echo for me of the '06 Bears, where I remember watching that season, and every week somebody stepped up on defense and did something amazing. They did so many takeaways, they had so many forced fumbles, they had so many playmakers, and people kept saying that's not sustainable. You can't keep winning games that way. You can't keep winning games when your offense doesn't show up. And yet somehow they made it to the Super Bowl. Obviously they couldn't win the Lombardi in the end. Peyton Manning and the Colts took that away from them, but they just kept rolling and they kept finding ways to make plays. And the Steelers have that kind of funny sense about them. They've got Deontay Johnson back, of course. Having Pickens and Johnson does make a big difference to the way Kenny Pickett plays, in my opinion. And he's looked slightly better over the past couple of weeks. For the Jags, that game against the Saints for me said a little something about, not all wins are created equal in the NFL. Of course, they all go in the win column and the loss column at the end of the day, but they're not all of the same quality. We know that. You now look at the Jags win against the Bills, and we look at where the Bills have been since, and go, they caught them at the right time. That win over the Saints, I mean, they're an awful Foster Moreau drop away from heading to overtime and quite possibly losing that game. And the Saints were just completely out of sync. So you're looking at the Jags going, how good are they really if they struggled that mightily to beat that team that was really not firing on anything like all cylinders? I think they've been lucky in their enemies. Things have fallen for them in the right way, and I don't think that streak is quite as formidable as it looks. And I think Steelers playing at home, got a bit of momentum about them. And I've been burned picking against them before, and I know I said they were a little bit fraudulent when we talked about them on Tuesday, but I actually think they might pull this one out. I'm going with Steelers in this one. Brian.
I was just going to ask if you got concussion since Tuesday's show, because I'm sitting here reading my notes as to why the Steelers won't win this game, and you're just contradicting everything I have. I don't understand what's happened since Tuesday. We're talking about them potentially being a team in the wrong place, in the wrong position, in a competitive AFC North. Look at the Jags over the past 3 games. We're talking about the narrative of who they played and what defenses they come up with. The reality is, if they're averaging 20 points a game offensively, and that's no mean feat, because you can argue that they're going against certain defenses, but when you're doing it consistently, we saw them in London. Okay, 27. The following week, they put up 30 against the Colts. They put up 31 against the Saints last week. And I was high on the Saints defense going into the season. And when we previewed the game last week on our Thursday Night Football special, Andrew Morgan, who's based out of Coventry, was discussing the fact that this Saints defense, was they weren't, sparking offensively, was the key piece of that team. And they did a number on them as well. I can't see if it gets to a stage, if the Jags get their mojo going offensively, and like Travis Etienne over the past month is really starting to settle into the really effective running back we thought we'd see. He kind of started off initially with the rookie at the start of the season, but he's gradually kind of come to the fall now as the leading piece. We saw him really effective in London, and I think the Jags will win this game. If it gets into a shootout, can Pickett and Pickens and the guys continue to keep tracking that? Not for me. I know the games in Pittsburgh will be a difficult one, but this is where the Jags are at. We're going for 5 wins in a row, potentially first time they've been unbeaten in October. They're moving in the right direction. I'll side with the team in the best of form, and that's the Jags.
All right, Colin, Rams at Cowboys. This has the look of a game, and look, it's around that time of the season now that could be a turning point for both teams, depending on which way it goes. You think the Rams have what it takes to emerge with a win from Arlington, or do the Cowboys get back on track with a win at home?
It's an interesting one, I suppose, in that Jerry Jones has come out this week, and on, as we talked about before, one of his 2 radio programs that he has every single week. The owner has 2 programs, and said that he would be prepared to really extend himself if it meant that they could find additional weapons on offense. People are taking that to mean that he's looking at Mike Evans and batting his eyelids, but apparently the Bucs are not going to move off of Mike Evans. Doesn't matter what the offer is. Yeah, well, we all know for the right price, everybody is movable. I think that you saw the Rams, I suppose, last week. I think they are much better than we expected. They have some really good young talent, but I think that you're probably have enough on the Dallas defense to be able to keep it in check. I am a huge admirer of Puka Nacua. I think he has been really one of the most amazing finds, because he wasn't supposed to do anything, and Cooper Kupp has come back. But I do think that they are they still struggle a little bit in terms of outside of those two guys. I think that the Cowboys will be able to cause enough trouble, but I expect this to be feisty. I don't think the Cowboys will be able to put a beat down on them. I think I saw Fred in the comments saying Cowboys maybe by 7-10. I'd say 7. I'd say Cowboys maybe by a touchdown.
Brian, we've seen the best and worst of the Cowboys in traditional fashion this season, putting a beat down on the Patriots, but also, having their ticket well and truly punched by their bête noire, the 49ers. Rams, on the other hand, even though they've lost a few games, have been pretty competitive in every game they've played and been there or thereabouts, as Colin said, a lot better than perhaps we expected at the start of the season. Found a couple of really nice pieces on offense, Kyron Williams and the aforementioned Puka among them. And Sean McVay, as we've mentioned again and again, looking absolutely energized, and a new father as well, so that'll soon sap the energy out of him. That'll take the wind out of his sails. What do you think?
I was looking at the numbers in the second half last week, because it kind of I'm probably coming across as quite down on the Steelers. I do recognize their defense is quite strong, and I was looking at the nature of how they dominated for large parts of that second half, and they only allowed 8 points to the Rams in the second half, and their offensive line struggled against that front seven of the Steelers. And you're going into Dallas against a really strong front seven. The Cowboys complement by a strong safety. I know they've lost some players to injury, but we saw similar, like when we saw the Patriots go in there, and not even in fairness, I was saying the Patriots offense is at the same level as the Rams. It's clearly not the case this season. But they now have to manage teams, and particularly now have to manage teams at home. I think the Cowboys will be quite dominant in this one. I think Colin said 7 points. It's funny, Colin must be really getting clued in on the betting angle, because the handicap in this game is 6.5 points. Right? And basically the books are suggesting it's a 7-point win for the Cowboys. And Colin's nailed it. He's gone with a 7-point win. But all joke aside, the Cowboys are coming off a bye as well. They're fully rested. I think this is a nice game for the Cowboys to get back on track as well. I think they win this game and do the double on LA, because they've obviously beaten the Chargers recently, and now they'll beat the Rams.
Yeah, I'd have to say I'd agree with that. I don't see the Cowboys running away with it by any means. I think the Rams are just too good and too competitive to let that happen. I do think when we look back on the season at the end of it, we'll probably, to be fair to the Cowboys, see that 49ers game as something of an outlier. They really did run into them at the perfect time from a Niners perspective. A little bit more banged up, the Niners, and I don't think they'd be capable of doing that to them in the way that it happened in that particular week. I think the Cowboys will get over the line here. I don't think it'll be by more than a score. I'd say it's a one-possession game, but I think it comes out in the way of Dallas. And that is the end of the first segment of our Week 8 preview, brought to you by RuPoint.com, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. See how RuPoint can help your business at RuPoint.com. Right, we start our second segment with Vikings at Packers column. An NFC North clash in Lambeau. Packers will be eager to atone for their loss last week. Vikings, on the other hand, have got their season back on track, 2 wins back to back, and suddenly things are looking a lot more competitive in the North, given that the Packers and the Lions both lost at the weekend. A really good one as far as Week 7 as far as the Vikings are concerned. Do you think the Vikings roll into what's been a tough hunting ground for them in the past and keep their momentum going, or does Jordan Love get the Packers back to winning ways?
No, I said it on Tuesday night show. If you lost to the Las Vegas Raiders this year, forget about it. You're not a serious football team if you lost to the Las Vegas Raiders, and I include my Denver Broncos in that. You just, no serious team is going to lose to the Raiders. The Packers have all sorts of problems, and the interesting thing is there's kind of been this debate on Twitter all week with a number of former QBs, Kurt Warner, Orlovsky, and others coming out to talk about how Jordan Love was not the issue, and that it's on the receivers, and somebody else saying no, it's on the play calling. So it would appear that there's enough blame to go around. But when you have that many opportunities against the Broncos and you can't put the Broncos away, they're really struggling. And whether it is that the offense is too young and they miscalculated in terms of moving off all the veteran players, whether it is that Jordan Love hasn't or can't take that step up, things just do not seem right. And the defense, is the defense. So I think that the Vikings can take advantage of a down year for the Packers, and they can go. Now, will it be easy? No, but I would certainly I would have the Vikings as favorites for this.
Yeah, I have to say, and it's not necessarily a spot that we've seen the Vikings in too often, going to Lambeau of recent vintage, or any other team in the NFC North for that matter. But Vikings have shown me something in particular over the last couple of weeks. I mean, without Justin Jefferson, they've really stepped up. The defense, as you've mentioned a few times, Colin, under Flores, really starting to take shape and really starting to cause nightmares for people. And that game against the 49ers, they also got a little bit of the bounce of the ball, which they really haven't had in earlier games. They dropped a tight one to the Eagles. They dropped a bit of a heartbreaker to the Chiefs, which could have gone the other way. They're really good teams they're playing against there. And they took out the Niners with that amazing catch from Addison, where he wrestles the ball away from Ward. Could very much have gone the other way and could have been a pick, but it wasn't. And they probably have earned that look over the course of the season. I know they had their fair share of good fortune last year, but they're really, really competitive. I think they're starting to feel themselves now, and a lot of things are clicking into gear. Don't necessarily have to focus too hard on things that the Packers could do well to maybe take this one out. And I don't think it's going to be a slam dunk for the Vikings by any manner of means. I think Aaron Jones is now probably going to be unleashed to a much greater extent this weekend. They kind of limited his carries, limited his snaps last weekend to ease him back in. I think we see a lot more of him. I think that defense is pretty much as good as any in the league, although it's hard given the way that they've played on offense, and they've been really anemic, certainly in comparison to what we're used to watching from Green Bay in other seasons. Bar that kind of burst where they blew by the Saints with that fourth quarter comeback. They really haven't shown an awful lot, excepting of course the 38-20 that they put on the Bears in the opening game of the season. But since when did the Packers not put 30 points plus on the Bears? I think you can just write that one off to the same old. But yeah, I think it's a Minnesota win for me, Brian.
We're all aligned on this one. I'm going with the Vikings, in particular the fact that you read some of the players that may be unavailable for the Packers, like defensively, they look quite banged up for this game. And it's good to see the likes of Jordan Addison stepping up now, because they needed something. We spoke about last week. They needed someone when Jefferson's out to kind of, be the marquee player. Colin last week called out, is there really anyone there? And the expectations of a rookie, but he's stepped up already. And if you look at the various different wide receivers that are drafted this year, he looks like he's the standout one right now. Yeah, I'm with the Vikings. I think the Packers are in a bit of a state of flux. Would it surprise me if the Packers were to win? Probably not, because we've seen so many times when teams are written off, but they're in a bit of a struggle. If they lose this, it's a 4-game losing streak for where they were at the start of the season, when people thought Jordan Love was the answer. They've really kind of struggled to kind of really get it going offensively. I think they'll struggle again on Sunday, in particular with the defense we touched on there. Flores, you've got Hunter, Boynham, they're all playing really well up front. Get to the quarterback, tough day for Love. The Vikings win this one.
Patriots Dolphins, column. It's one of a couple of games this week, which is the end of a divisional rivalry for the season already. Miami will look to complete the sweep, having beat the Patriots in week 2. Certainly, I would feel that the Dolphins will have this one. How do you see it going?
This is another team who lost to the Las Vegas Raiders, and so I think that should tell you how I feel about them. I do think this Dolphins team is a little bit banged up. I think the O-line has been creaking a little bit. But you look at the Patriots and you wonder, will they be able to take advantage of it? And I did think that they did well. Like last week wasn't a fluke. It wasn't like the Bills turned the ball over a whole host of times or anything like that. They did win the game. But you do look at the roster, and it's not stacked with talent. Like if you were to say, how many of the players on the Patriots roster are first round talents, right? And outside of Gonzalez and Judon, the two players who are missing, I think you might be struggling to find players there. The Dolphins will want to get back on track after that loss to the Eagles. And while I do think the Patriots and Belichick will come up with a plan to slow them down, I don't think they will be able to keep pace with this Miami Dolphins offense. So I'm going to say it's going to be the Dolphins to get the ship back on track.
Brian, these tend to be the type of games that the Dolphins win. Patriots, though, are coming off a victory, and they'll hope that they can pick up something from that. As Colin mentioned, they are one of those teams that's lost to the Raiders, which tells you an awful lot about where they are right now compared to where they once were. And what do you think?
Well, look, they made changes last week on the offensive line. They moved players around, and it worked, and it caught the Bills off guard because the Bills struggled for large parts to get to Mac Jones. But I don't think even in this game they will have it as easy in terms of holding off a defensive front seven in Miami that on their day have been really strong, and particularly at home. I think Mac Jones is in for a difficult day. And the Dolphins have Colin saying whether the Patriots will be able to keep up with them. Well, the Dolphins have scored 30 plus points in every home game this season, and you can imagine they'll be able to do something similar at the weekend. In the last day, Tyreek Hill, there's question marks over his availability on Sunday. He seems to be very, he seems to be very confident which he will play on Sunday, which is a big. If you take him out of the side, essentially you're cutting the offense in half for me because everything goes through him. And even Waddle last weekend was struggling as well. So with him not 100% and you take Hill out, it maybe would bring the game back to a bit of an even keel. But with them playing, I can't see anything else than the Dolphins win. I think last week's win for the Patriots was great, and Belichick has a way of doing this from time to time. But realistically, over the course of the season, they can't live with the likes of these teams, in particular a team that's arguably the best in the AFC.
Hey, Saints at Colts is our next game. Maybe I'll start off with this one. Two teams, of course, that were both involved in high scoring and quite exciting back and forth matchups in the past week. Colts will probably count themselves pretty unlucky to have dropped one to the Browns, and they had two controversial penalties, as we talked about on Tuesday, that cost them dearly. One that reversed what would have been a fumble that probably would have allowed them to seal the game. Another one, crazy defensive pass interference call for a ball that in no way, shape or form looked to the watching world as catchable, but the refs making a very different decision there. This is, of course, the Super Bowl 44 rematch. A lot has changed for both of these franchises since then. There's no Drew Brees and there's no Peyton Manning anymore, so it's a very different matchup of quarterbacks in this one. Saints, as I mentioned when we were talking on Tuesday, and we chatted about it in our Talking Points show, just look really, really disjointed. It's not really happening for Derek Carr. He looks very irritated. All he's got in his locker, as we said on Tuesday, is that check down to Alvin Kamara, which will work until it doesn't, as we saw against the Jags in the last match. And yet, that said, ball doesn't go through Foster Moreau's hands, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, the Saints tight end, and they probably pick up a win there against the Jags. So defense is going to keep them in games. They do have Alvin Kamara and they do have Michael Thomas, and for now at least they have Olave. So they're not short of ways to win. They just haven't figured out the way to get the pieces on the board in a way that is fitting the way Derek Carr has seen it, and it's been a little bit frustrating for them. Colts, on the other hand, they look at what they did to the Browns, to one of the better defenses in the league, if not the best defense in the league, certainly with the way Myles Garrett is playing at the moment. Gardner Minshew cutting them up and running in for a couple of touchdowns, a couple of big chunk plays. Michael Pittman looking back to something approaching his best. They've got Moss back in the lineup and playing really well. They got Jonathan Taylor back. I think the Colts at home will have enough to win this one. Brian, how do you see it going?
I read a brilliant quote earlier which said if the Saints can replicate their four-quarter play offensively, they'll definitely win this game, because the Colts defense over the past 2 weeks has given up 30 points to the Jags and 39 points last weekend to a Browns offense that hadn't done a lot. But can you take that on and be convinced by it? Because, as you said, it just hasn't worked, hasn't materialized in any way, shape, or form. And right now, I think the better story here is the Colts, and I think the Colts. I agree. I'll go Colts. I think it's a tight game though. It's difficult.
The Saints look like a team to me, Colin, that should be trying the no huddle. Like when Derek Carr doesn't have time to think, it actually seems to be working much better for him. Like when he's trying to figure things out on the fly, it kind of like in that fourth quarter drive where they just had to have it, bar the terrible drop at the end. They were nearly there in a way that it wasn't working for them at all before that.
Yeah, there's probably something to that, but ultimately they've won one of their last 5, and I think that the Colts are ahead of where I expect them to be. I think where most people probably expected them to be at this point of the season. And the impressive thing is they're doing this with a backup QB. I just think, things don't seem right. You've got Chris Olave getting arrested, and the defense with the Saints, which has been, the stalwart for so long, it just doesn't seem right. And I think that ultimately this is two teams who probably not. I don't think either will probably end up making the playoffs. But I'm going to say that I don't. Like a few weeks ago, right, or before the season started, I would have said I expect the Saints defense to be much better, and they could cause the Colts issues. But having seen what Shane Steichen did last week, I think he will be able to score points, and I think it'll be a close game. But I'm going to go Colts as well. I think they're capable of getting the win. That potentially means that the Saints probably will do it, but going to say Colts.
Brian, Commanders at Eagles, another one of those games that we mentioned is that brings the curtain down on that divisional rivalry for the season, and it's a very good divisional rivalry. On paper, you think Eagles' best record in the conference. Yeah, of course they have this one over the Commanders, but it doesn't necessarily go that way. Divisional, obviously, rivalry has its own dynamic, but this one in particular, Commanders always play the Eagles close, as they did in an overtime loss earlier this season. Can they get over the line this time?
I'm reflecting on last year as well, Connor. It's not just much the game in overtime this year. They beat them in Philly last year, and they lost the game. It was a very tight game in Washington last year. If you recall that game, I think that's the one where the wall fell down and nearly knocked Jalen Hurts out for the season. If the wall had fell on his leg, it's probably one of those things. A couple of inches the other way, and he's gone. And probably one of the weirdest injuries over the course of the season. But it took a late touchdown in that game to get them over the line. And Jalen Hurts this week is playing down, like everybody to do with the Eagles organization. They're playing down the Hurts injury, but clearly didn't look right towards the end of the game. I wonder how limited he will be in this game. And what I would say is, if he is limited, I do think the Commanders that defensively haven't put it together properly this year. They played well in sports and they've won games, but they haven't consistently put it together. Last weekend, they had opportunities to get Tyrod Taylor, didn't really materialize. And Jalen Hurts is a quarterback beyond the limitation of Tyrod Taylor, but is he playing 100%? And that's, for me, is the biggest concern. And if he's not, I think the Commanders can hang around. I think they can find a way to navigate a victory here, because form goes out the window in these games, in particular when these two play. So I'm going to go with the shock. I'm going to go with the Commanders to right the wrongs of their poor performance in New York last week and turn the Eagles over and cause one of the biggest surprises of the weekend, because there's always a big surprise. I think it's this game.
Colm, big surprises, as Brian says, potentially on the cards as far as he sees it, but would it be that big a surprise? The Eagles, for all of their quality, they lost the game to the Jets. They were played very close by the Vikings, and they've had a couple of, and the Commanders themselves, they've had a couple of moments this season where the whole has been a lot less than the sum of the parts, and yet they're 6-1. For you, is the shock on?
No. Did you see John Allen in the dressing room after the game last week? I mean, that's it. The Commanders, they'll be feisty. They might, and there is questions perhaps around is Jalen Hurts carrying a knock? Sam Howell is on course for 100 sacks. 100 sacks. And I don't care that the Eagles aren't quite the force they were last year. The Giants absolutely feasted last week. It was crazy at times. You telling me Jalen Carter isn't going to be looking at this and thinking, happy days. And Sam Howell just shows no sign of changing or learning. Magic is getting involved again last week. He's tweeting about kind of how disappointed he is. I don't think things are right in the building there in any way, shape, or form. And I just have a hard time. Yeah, it is an NFC East matchup. Yeah, it'll be feisty. Yeah, they might make things very difficult for the Eagles. But I don't think they will have enough. I don't think the line will be able to hold up. And I think ultimately the sacks that Sam Howell continues to take are going to be an issue for him and for the Commanders.
Connor, can I just jump in a quick point? Sorry. Sam Howell 3 weeks ago put over 300 yards on this defense and scored 31 points in Philadelphia. There's an avenue for him to do it against this defense. He has done it before. I caveat that as bad as the team has been on the offensive line, it's not too long ago that he was putting a number on this defense. Came out the wrong side of an overtime loss.
Yeah, like you, Brian, I did look at this one and think there's going to be a shock somewhere on the card here. Is this the one? Do the Commanders just have the Eagles number? Is it just one of those funny little rivalries where the underdog has the Indian sign over them? But I just can't see it. It's Eagles for me. I think they push their way to yet another victory. And there's a scarier sight than the brotherly shove, as they call it in Philadelphia in the NFL at the moment. I don't know what it is. I think that will get them where they need to be. And that is the end of our second segment of previews. We start our third segment with Giants at Jets. I'll go to you first on this one, Brian. It's a home tie, even though the Giants are technically on the road, I guess. But Jets going for their third victory in a row. They've leveled up their record at 3-3, which didn't look possible when Aaron Rodgers went down, and particularly with the travails of Zach Wilson. But somehow they've found a way to stack a couple of wins in the column and get to 500. Does this put them over the top? Or is it, in fact, the Giants who keep their mojo going after picking up their W last week?
It's been a feisty week in New York, in particular on the local radio stations, with former players being removed from the radio station, having getting in disgruntled arguments. Not necessarily him, but other people. But the Jets have done a lot of talking this week, and the Giants are not saying a lot. And I'm kind of reminded of that 2011 game, which Rex Ryan did everything in his power to make sure everybody felt like the Jets were the big powerhouse in town, and it never really transpired. The Giants beat them. Seems a long time ago since that intense rivalry was there, but it seems to have come along this week. I took time out to do a number of different podcasts this week with Jets and Giants following in. I'm super keen on this game, but everybody agrees this game ultimately is going to come down to two parts and one combination game, essentially, which defensive front seven can manhandle the offensive line. And for the Giants this weekend, it's a huge opportunity in the sense that Andrew Thomas is coming back and Michael Smith is going to come back at centre to get to move Pugh back into left guard. So maybe the right time the Giants are finally getting players back on the offensive line that can help them put an offensive display together. You probably think I'm being biased, but I am going to go with the Giants. I think defensively over the last 3 weeks, the Giants have really going to come back to the fold in terms of what they were doing last year. They really seem to have turned the corner there. And I think, genuinely, if you're asking me which quarterback I trust right now, I think it will be Tyrod Taylor. It looks like he will play over Zach Wilson. I think Zach Wilson has won 2 games, and Colin rightly called it out. They're winning despite of him. And I think that's where we're going to be at on Sunday. I think the Giants front seven can cause him struggles. I think he's more likely to have that shocking play, which leads to a victory or a turnover or a pick six. And I think the Giants might squeak a low-scoring game out and win this game.
Yeah, I was saying I didn't see the surprise in the Commanders-Eagles game as hard as I squinted at it. And I don't know how much of a surprise it would be given both teams are on their backups, as you say, Brian. But I do think the Giants will take this one. I just find it impossibly hard to trust Zach Wilson. It's not that they don't have the playmakers on defense, or that you don't get a miraculous Garrett Wilson catch or a Breece Hall run or something that breaks the game open from a Jets perspective. But yeah, I think it's a Giants win. Colin?
It's a very tough game to pick. I think that there's probably a couple of things that kind of stick out to me, because we were discussing the Giants on Tuesday's show, and I think after this game, I actually think there's probably some pressure on Brian Daboll to really get the Giants to perform much better. And after this game, because this game is, I mean, it's something of a derby match, and you kind of don't know what way it's going to go. But after this, the Giants' schedule is pretty favorable. And I'm very interested to see what happens in terms of the QB there, because yes, it's been 2 games, but we've seen more from Tyrod Taylor than we have from Daniel Jones. Now, that is deeply concerning if you're Joe Shane, who gave him the contract. And I can absolutely see why the Giants win this. I do think this is a coin flip game. But I'm going to say that 52 times out of 100, the Jets win. 48 times out of 100, the Giants win. I'm going to say that it falls for the Jets. I just think that defense has been really good, and they were very impressive despite not having the cornerbacks. I think that ultimately it's going to be the defense that wins this. I don't think it's going to be either of the offenses. I'll go Jets, but like, I don't think you could say that if the Giants won this, would this be a surprise? No way, not in any way, shape, or form.
All right, dropped off the internet went out, but I got you just back in time, Colin, for the money shot there for the prediction. Right, we move to the 9 o'clock window now, and Browns at Seahawks is the first game up there. So I'll kick off with this one. Interesting storyline, of course, for Cleveland, being that PJ Walker is in, no Deshaun Watson this week. Love to know what the full story is there. Deshaun Watson assessed for a concussion in the game at the weekend and not put back in, despite the fact that he cleared the concussion protocol. A lot of people wondering, is that as much to do with form rather than protecting the quarterback, and a sense that maybe PJ Walker gives them a better chance to win, which is a crazy thing to think, given what we would have expected at the start of the season. But we haven't seen anything like the Texans, Deshaun Watson in a Browns jersey yet. We await to see that, and people starting to wonder whether we ever will, the way things have been going for them. Didn't like what I saw from a Browns perspective in terms of how Gardner Minshew and the Colts were able to move the football. Like, okay, they Browns are still incredibly difficult to run on. I think that is going to cause the Seahawks some difficulty, because obviously it's such a mainstay of how they play, and they rely on Kenneth Walker eating up ground for them. Don't see that happening necessarily against the Browns, but the Browns really do give up chunk plays, and it was alarming given the quality of what they have defensively. I think a lot of what you saw at the weekend was the Myles Garrett show, obviously, and he put together a one-man highlight reel, one of the greater defensive performances we've seen in many years, in that win for them. But relying on a bit of good fortune, as we said, from a refereeing point of view, to get them over the line. Seahawks, I'm not entirely sure I'm massively trusting of either. And Brian, we talked about on Tuesday how you look at Gino and he often looks to be one pass away from disaster, and he can have an off night and it suddenly goes very, very wrong for Seattle. But playing at home against this Browns team, I think it's going to be Seattle's for the taking. Brian, how do you see it?
I would run that. I think Seattle are primed to win this game. I think if Gino, as you said, can reduce the risks and the gambling plays, which he's been doing, and the miscues and the kind of you talk about there's no term in the NFL, all security is job security, but he doesn't seem to be playing with that security which we saw last year, where he was making the right decision at the right time. Like we saw last week, the flimsy interception in the red zone when the game was there to be put away, and he leaves teams hanging around, and on a different day, a better team capitalizes on that and puts them away. And that could be the case on Sunday, because we saw what turnovers did last weekend. We spoke about on Tuesday in critical moments in the game in Indianapolis, which led to the Browns getting over the line. But in this instance, I think Seattle will do enough. I think even defensively, Seattle are very strong. We're talking about today, Witherspoon now Dean's been the number 1 cornerback in the league, and he's a rookie. It's just supposed to show how strong this defense can be. And PJ Walker's in for a difficult day, and I think the Seahawks get the win.
Colin, dog pound on tour, 12's wanting to make a home stand. Which fan base is the happier after this one?
The Seahawks can't lose in those throwback uniforms, can they? Probably the best of the lot this season, when teams are finally going back to some of the old uniforms. But I think the Seahawks defense has been underrated this year. Very, very impressive. And yeah, Gino's probably taking more risks this year. But I think that the Browns will struggle to score points on this defense in the way that they were able to do against the Colts. And we will see. I suppose there's kind of definitely a push on social media now to say that, why are people questioning Deshaun? He's clearly injured, and that it is a strange situation. And we've definitely seen this week Brady Quinn get into it. I think Devin Weatherspoon has had a few bits and pieces to say. That's what you expect. Talked about the wide receivers being divas. Well, cornerbacks are always good, to wind the opposition up, and they like to do that. I think that the Browns defense will make life very difficult for the Seahawks. I just don't think the Browns will be able to score enough points, and I have the Seahawks winning this one.
All right, Ravens and Cardinals. Brian, I realized I misspoke earlier when I said that the tush push was the scariest thing you see in the NFL in the run up to Halloween. Clearly, the scariest thing you'll see in the NFL in the run up to Halloween is Lamar Jackson on a tear. He is Jason, Freddie, and Michael Myers rolled into one at the moment. Just looks unstoppable. Any way Arizona can pull this out.
I'm very cautious about this game because we've let ourselves down earlier on in the season when we've suggested games were a formality, and we suggested last week the Bills was a formality, and only to have our pants pulled down ahead of our Tuesday night show. But it's very difficult to put up an argument. We spoke about it last week. I think we put up the stat, and it was even pre last week's game, 44-7. I think it was the points, differential in terms of the second half has been materialized for the Cards. They seem to be a team. I read a great quote by Michael Lombardi. There's numerous teams in the league. Some of them are 40-minute teams. Some of them are 50-minute teams. Some of them are even 59-minute teams. But the teams that are 60-minute teams are ultimately the teams that are there at the end of the season. But in this game, you would imagine come 40 minutes, 45 minutes, the Ravens would have this well and truly home and hose. The only thing I can put out there is they get complacent, or we have one of those quirky days where they just don't get going, because the Cardinals have, in particular at home, they've come out early on teams. They've put they've scored early, and they've kind of put a marker down, and they have teams playing catch up with them. But gradually, as they've gone on the road, that hasn't materialized. You see the level of play they're up against, and teams get ahead of them, and then it's very difficult for them to claw back. So unless they get a lead, which is difficult for them, for the Ravens to get back. But if the Ravens come out and do what we saw last week, was 4 touchdowns in the 4 opening drives, game is over before half time, which it was last week. Can't see anything other than a Ravens win. And the bigger story next week will be whether they're going to put Kyler Murray in next week, because that ultimately could jeopardize where they end up in terms of the draft selections come the end of the season.
Colin, as Brian rightly said, we can sometimes get carried away with recency bias and expect that certain results are inevitable. And yet, one thing you would say about the Ravens is the 2 losses they've had are pretty boneheaded losses, and particularly the one against the Steelers is one they'd have loved to have had back. Really a game they should have won comfortably, which they somehow contrived to find a way to hand over to the Steelers. So it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that they could drop this one to the Cardinals.
No, and that's the piece that they have to be dialed in. The concern, I suppose, for the Ravens is that they're looking beyond this, and they're looking to the game against the Seahawks. Do you remember the great is it a quiz show is the way to describe it, supermarket sweep back in the 90s, and then occasionally you get somebody who got to do the run around the supermarket and would completely lose the head and would make all the wrong decisions, put all the wrong things in to the shopping trolley, and you were screaming at the TV saying, no, don't get that, get the frozen turkeys. But that can be the Ravens at times, right? Sometimes they make all the right decisions, and everything is fantastic. And they can be they are capable of beating anybody. You asking me, are the Ravens capable of beating the Eagles, the 49ers, the Chiefs? Yes, I think on their day they're capable of doing that. They have shown that defensively they're fantastic, offensively they're brilliant. They have to continue to do it and consistently do it. Now, I think maybe those losses will highlight the fact that they need, if they have to win the division and they want to compete for the number one overall seed. They want people to have to come into Baltimore. So if they want to do that, they have to win this sort of game. They're capable of doing it. They should do it. But if you underestimate your opponent in the NFL, they can catch you cold. The Ravens should win this game, but they've got to show up in Arizona.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. They should, and I think they will. As we've talked about before on the show, I've really enjoyed seeing this Ravens offense, the new Ted Monken offense, really click and then really get the feel of all of the different weapons that they have in front of Lamar. Lamar's poise and patience that we talked about on Tuesday has really come to the fore, and they're irresistible at the moment. Defensively, no team has racked up more sacks. They don't necessarily always have the flashy defensive plays, but they're ruthlessly effective as a pass rush. They're a really good secondary, best linebacker core in the league, arguably. They're a beautifully balanced team, and I think they take care of this fairly handily. Not getting complacent about it, but I think it's a clear Ravens win for me. Bengals at Niners, one that I'm struggling with a little bit, but before I reveal my hand, Brian, what do you think is going to happen here?
Well, it's all about Brock Purdy, isn't it? Like, he's kind of struggled over the past 2 weeks. We saw the interceptions a couple of weeks ago in Cleveland. He didn't have the best of games that day. He seemed to struggle with a front seven coming after him. Then last Monday night, he again had very stiff shoulders, and obviously now he's had the concussion and he's very unlikely to play. So, I mean, Sam Darnold is going to step in. Isn't that what Sam Darnold was brought in for? Like, over the course of the offseason, it was you were tiptoeing around whether he would be him or Trey Lance as the number 2, and then gradually over the period we were getting nuggets and snippets of information, various beat writers. Sam Darnold, in the sense he was the second man in command there, and in an instance where he has to come in to feel really comfortable, he can come in and run this offense efficiently for the 49ers. And the Bengals, we're talking about a really tough AFC North right now. We're talking about teams tends to be in false position, but the reality is they're all there with a winning record, and the Bengals need this one. And I don't think they'll ever get a better opportunity to go into Santa Clara, bear in mind they're going to go up against Sam Darnold. But I still feel the 49ers, because you're looking at a 49ers defense that hasn't played, well over the course of the last 2 weeks either. I know PJ Walker didn't have the greatest of games, but they gave up some really big plays at key times in the game, which they haven't been doing over the course of the season. I'm going to side the 49ers. I still think they'll have enough. I think Sam Darnold will come in and manage the game efficiently enough to allow other players to do stuff on offense. And I think defensively, we're convinced now Burrow's back to 100%. I'm not entirely sure that's the case. We saw against the Seahawks 2 weeks ago where they struggled in the red zone. And if it wasn't for the inefficiency of the Seahawks in particular, they probably would have lost that game. So I'm going to stick with the 49ers. I think they will finally get back on track, having lost the last 2 games.
Okay, interesting. I'm going Cincinnati in this one. I think that they're going to send the Niners to a third consecutive defeat. Christian McCaffrey is just so important to this 49ers offense, and he's not right, and it's not working the way it was when he was at full power. They're not rushing the ball as well. He's not getting as many yards per carry, and how would he, carrying the injury that he's picked up? It's not completely stopped him. He's not missed game time, but it is slowing him down, and it is affecting his performance. And as he goes, that really affects all the pieces around him. And it's kind of funny that they've become so reliant on him. I mean, he supercharged the offense when he arrived there last season. Everything just slotted into place beautifully, including Purdy's own performances. Sam Darnold getting the start, I think, is an extra burden that they're going to have to carry. How quickly is he going to be able to slot in, even in this famously quarterback-proof offense that Shanahan has? Bengals off the bye, that extra bit of time, recovery time for Burrow. They haven't looked anywhere near their best, but then they didn't look anywhere near their best at this stage of last season either. I think there's so much more to come from Cincinnati, and this is a game that you got to think they'll be targeting. To your point, Brian, when are they going to get a better chance to get a win in Santa Clara? I think it's this weekend for them. Colin.
Yeah, interesting fallout from what happened in Minneapolis, I suppose. And Rory has talked about it there in terms of the 7-man blitz, which seems to be what everyone is kind of talking about. And Mike Florio has had quite an interesting, or sparked an interesting debate, because he said why. Because Kyle Shanahan came out and said Steve Wilkes knows that he messed up there. I think it's the first time, since 2000, which I believe is when they started collecting the data. So potentially first time ever that somebody's called a 7-man blitz with less than 30 seconds left. There were 16 seconds when Steve Wilkes ultimately decided to call it. And Shanahan came out and said, yeah, he shouldn't have done that. He messed up. There's a time and a place for it. That wasn't it. Florio said, well, why didn't Shanahan veto it? JJ Watt came out and said, how much time do you think they have for a powwow? Mike, various other people have had their say on this. But I just thought it was interesting, right? Because, everything was humming in the Bay a few weeks ago. They were getting everything right on offense, everything right on defense. All of a sudden, things on both sides of the ball, right? When, the injuries are there, and all of a sudden the defensive coordinator, the head coach is saying, yeah, he messed up. Steve Wilkes is probably big enough to acknowledge that and to deal with it. It's not like he's a young guy, and he has head coaching experience. I did see Purdy was back in practice, but we don't know what that means. Like, how limited was he? And that I thought that was somewhat fascinating that he was back, like, given the blow that he took, and to be in the concussion protocol and then to be back. That to me, again, we talked about it on Tuesday, just the NFL has to get serious about player safety, really does. But the other piece that I saw this week was Burrow is taking snaps under center. I think that's very good news for his calf. I think that's very good news for the Bengals running game. I do think they need to, they need T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd to take a step up. They have disappointed this year. We've seen Chase step up, but we need to see the others step up. I'm with you, Connor. I think this is a great opportunity. I don't think the 49ers are fully healthy. I don't think even if Purdy plays, I don't think he can possibly be fully healthy. I don't think McCaffrey is. Trent Williams isn't. Debo isn't. I think there is the opportunity here, and I think the Bengals are desperate. I think they need it more than the Niners, so I'm going to say they can do it.
All right, we're into our final segment of Week 8 previews, and we start with what has historically been a keenly contested divisional game between the Chiefs and the Broncos. Colin, that's the best I can do to make it sound like the Broncos have a chance here. Is there any way that Denver make a homestand against Kansas City in the form that they're in, do you think?
When was the last time it was keenly contested, Connor? Because it wasn't at any time recently. I can tell you that.
I said historically.
Historically. It's been a long time since the Broncos beat the Chiefs, and I suppose people are going to point to the victory over the Packers, but like Russell Wilson, just to go like, so his QBR, right, which doesn't tell you everything, but that's the rating out of 100. So against Vegas, 74. 25th ranked defense. Against the Commanders, 44th, 26th ranked defense. Against the Dolphins, 62, 24th. Against the Bears, 39th, 28th. Against the Jets and Kansas City, 18 against the Jets, 10 against Kansas City. Those are two top 10 defenses. And against Green Bay, 78 against the 27th. So when he's playing a bad defense, Russ looks pretty good. Not elite, not absolutely Russ of old or vintage Russ. But when he's playing a top 10 defense, he looks terrible. Terrible. He didn't have 100 yards against the Chiefs the last time around. It is in Denver, so they'll probably be a little bit better. It's absolutely possible the Broncos get the victory. We've seen plenty of upsets over the years, but everything would have to go right for the Broncos. Everything would have to go wrong for the Chiefs. McCall Hardman coming back in, I think, has helped the Chiefs. Mahomes is playing out of his mind. Like, guys are running the wrong routes, and he's still doing it. Don't know if you saw that clip against Travis Kelce last week, where the Chargers rookie kind of comes up to him and he gave a really fascinating answer. He said to him, like, any advice for a rookie? And Kelce said, know the other side of the ball as well as you know your own. Yeah. And I think
was Matlock, was it? It's Matlock, the Chargers rookie, I think, wasn't it?
Matlock, as Grandpa Simpson would say. But I just thought that was fascinating, right? Because that tells you about Travis Kelce's mindset and how and why he finds space. He has been like absolute kryptonite for the Broncos. I'm watching the Broncos since 1989. They've always had issues covering tight ends, but particularly when it comes to Travis Kelce. The Kareem Jackson, as expected, the league backed down. It's only a 2-game suspension, but it will mean there's younger players in there. So we'll see. This is very, very often it ends up being closer than the ability or the team's records would ultimately be. But it's hard to say the Broncos beating the Chiefs, unfortunately.
Brian, if you're making the case, you'd say the Broncos defensively have definitely looked better over the past couple of weeks, albeit against some of the lesser powered offenses in the league. This is a very different proposition. And, lest we forget, it's not as if the Chiefs are sleeping on the other side of the ball either. They've looked like certainly one of the best pass defenses in the league. They have playmakers all over that side of the ball too. McDuffie, Jones, Willie Gay had a great game at the weekend too. It's an awesome prospect right now. As Colm said, Patrick Mahomes hasn't always had everything going his way on offense, but he just is an absolute wizard with that football. He can find guys, he can find ways to turn broken plays into gold over and over again. And as if Denver didn't have enough to handle, Rashee Rice really looks to be settling in nicely there, and they've got McCall Hardman in the mix too.
They're spoiled with the riches, aren't they? Connor, you touched on Rice there. He was a lower pick, and his numbers are already off the charts. So he's potentially hitting 1,000-yard season for a rookie wide receiver. And obviously, we're going to talk about the first round picks, but he's stepping up defensively for me. And maybe with the exception last week, because I thought the Chargers, but we discussed that, albeit we were never really in doubt who was going to win. The Chargers did find ways to get up and down the field on them last week, but by and large, Spagnuolo this season in particular has had, maybe with the exception of the Lions game where they were really missing Chris Jones, they've been really strong defensively. Like Colm said, you look at that front seven, and if they can get to Russell Wilson, and Russell Wilson's production this season has obviously been compromised because he looks very good against poorer defenses, but when it comes to the upper echelons, he struggles, and unfortunately that's where I see this game. And Mahomes didn't start the season too impressively, but he's starting to gradually come back to what we've seen last year, in the sense of it doesn't necessarily matter who's out in the field offensively in the wide receiver position, obviously with Travis Kelce there. The only way I can see it is if Travis Kelce has a down game or a slow game, because Colm has called it out a couple of weeks ago. When he's not in the offense, it's a completely different team. We talk about great teams. We talk about Jalen Hurts, and like you take AJ Brown out of that team, for example. You take Kelce out of the team. They're just not the same team as good as they are. But can they slow them down? That's difficult. I just don't see it. Unfortunately, I think it's another Chiefs victory. And what would that be? 16 in a row? It's at some stage the streak has to end. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be this season.
Yeah, to me, Broncos have 3 chances. It's injury, it's complacency, or it's poor officiating that somehow goes in their favor. Mano a mano, unfortunately, I don't think there's any way that we're going to see anything other than a Kansas City win.
Yeah, so just one more in this game, because we're talking about complacency, and I don't remember this well. I know it's a different coaching staff, but last year when they played the Chiefs at home, the Chiefs got out to a really quick start, and there was fumbles and recovered touchdowns, in terms of defensively. And I think they were up to something like 21-0, something thereabouts. And Kelce and the guys were smirking on the sideline. And I remember that really agitated the Broncos players. And they came back really strong in that game. and they never got close to winning. They put up a really strong performance from, say, mid-second quarter. I wonder, a lot of those players are still around. I wonder if that's still in the back of their minds that they came in here last year, tried to hand us a lesson, and we came back and gave them a bit of a shock in the end. I wonder if that could still play in their mind that let's remember that. Let's remember how they tried to play with us and toy with us last season and use that as a bit of a sticking point or motivation to go in there on Sunday.
All right, our next game is the Sunday night football game, Bears at Chargers, which a lot of neutral fans will probably roll their eyes and go, how is this the primetime game? Unfortunately, people, Chicago and LA are two big media markets, so you end up with a couple of these stinkers in the primetime windows, unfortunately. I might kick off here, obviously, because it's Chicago, and Tyson Bagent gets another start, the undrafted rookie. Obviously, chalked up a win against the Raiders. As Colin said, that is the current litmus test for how competent your team are in the NFL. Lose to the Raiders, you were doing nothing this season. I'm still not sure, having beaten the Raiders, that Chicago is necessarily going to do anything themselves. But one thing I did pick up from that Bears win is that, interestingly, having slotted Bagent in, Luke Getsy's offensive scheming probably has hit the note that they arguably need to hit when they've got Fields there, which is get the ball out quickly, lean heavily on the run game. Deontay Foreman had an unbelievable game for Chicago last week, and they've got 3 good running backs there between Foreman, Khalil Herbert when he's fit, and Roshan Johnson when he's back. And that seems to be, to me, the secret for Chicago. I think earlier this season they really struggled to slot Chase Claypool in. They were playing a lot of 3 and 4 wide receiver sets, which really didn't suit what Getsy was trying to do and what they probably need to do around Fields. They acquired all these tight ends for a reason in the offseason. They haven't really started using them until they dropped Claypool, and that's been something nice to watch from a Chicago point of view. Chargers are 8.5-point favorites in this game, though, for a reason. They're playing at home. They're playing against a bad Bears team. They're playing against Tyson Bagent, who game managed to perfection against the Raiders and was protected nicely by the game plan, but probably won't get anything like the treatment from the Chargers that he got from the Raiders. It's going to be a much tougher time for him. At the same time, Chargers 8.5-point favorites. It's hard to see the Chargers taking care of business to that extent against any team in the NFL. The way they play, they'll give everyone a chance. And it's a game that probably to a certain extent has the sort of Damocles hanging over Brendan Staley. It's been there for a while. If you can't beat this Bears team at home against an undrafted rookie, it's taxi for Mr. Staley, in my view. Colin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you've pretty much summed it up there, Connor. I mean, if the Chargers don't win, I think that will be it. I think even the Spanos, who generally, don't never make a move in season, would have to. Right? You can't lose to. I mean, the joke about like the Giants O-line guy, straight off the couch. But that's what the Bears have done. And look, kudos to him. He is living the dream. The kid has come in and he's not only played in the NFL, he's won a game. He got a game ball. And you saw that he's clearly popular because of the way the dressing room reacted to him. But, this was the Raiders who lost to Jeff Saturday and the Indianapolis Colts. Let us never, ever, ever forget that happened. And Josh McDaniels, that should probably preface. Forget Super Bowl winner Josh McDaniels lost to Jeff Saturday. Josh McDaniels happened to win some Super Bowls with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. But yeah, it's the NFL. And if the Chargers are complacent, if they don't take care of business, then the Bears can do them. There's talent there, certainly, but this should be a one that the Chargers should win. They probably stave off, the executioner for another little while. But I do think that the Chargers probably need root and branch reform. Again. They decided to pass on Zay Flowers, right? They didn't go down that route. And for what? They went for another big-bodied receiver. None of it makes any sense. Again, where are I just don't believe the weapons are there for Herbert. And I think given the money they have spent on defense, given they have a defensive-minded head coach, they're not impressive on defense at all. But they still should win this.
Yeah, Brian, it's a good point Colin makes against about the Chargers defense. You kind of nearly forget Joey Bosa's even playing for this team. He just seems to have disappeared over the last couple of weeks. He's one guy who really needs to step up here. Obviously, as a Bears fan, I hope, even though I picked against them, the Bears win. In another way, though, I hope they don't, because it will deprive us of the weekly Staley musings that we've grown to know and love from your own musings.
Bosa's sack count is way down on the season, as is his brothers and various different other players. Kayvon Thibodeau has more sacks than both of them, but yeah, he seems to be the one being hung out to dry in the New York market by certain people. But in this instance, maybe Khalil Mack is the guy that's come to the fore of the season. He had the 8 sacks in the record-breaking game against the Raiders a couple of weeks ago, and timely sack last week as well, albeit it wasn't to be. He had a strong game last week in Kansas City. It's not even about winning the game and getting over the line for me. They need to be winning this game comprehensively. So you take a step back, and we talked about the great storyline of the quarterback. And you touched on it just briefly there as you started the intro into this game. The reality is it's Sunday Night Football. It's prime time. It's a quarterback coming into the league who's had a really great first game. This really should be the magnitude of where other teams step in and say, okay, you've got a lot to learn. You've got a lot to go before you really are a team to be like in this world of an NFL quarterback. And they should be putting the beat down on the Bears with all due respect, because the Bears of where they're at. But this is the reality of the Chargers. They'll probably allow the Bears to hang around for large parts of the game, and they might sneak over the line. And he'll get away for another week. I'm just looking a little bit ahead. They're on the road to the Jets next week, and then they play the Lions. If they were to lose this game, surely the ownership would look at that and go, with the 2 games coming up, there is a scenario where we could end up being 2-7. Like, are we better off not just ripping the Band-Aid off now and going for it and bringing in someone as an interim head coach? Because we've seen in the past, in particular this division, do you remember 2 years ago where the Raiders sacked their head coach? We're talking about the Raiders a lot these days. They sacked their head coach. The temporary head coach came in, who's now the special teams coordinator in Green Bay, and he led them to the playoffs. Sometimes a quick change can do dramatic things in terms of how a team is structured and moves on. They'll probably win, but I don't think we'll be fighting off any Brandon Staley conversation. I think there'll be plenty to come in the coming weeks. But look, I'm surprised it wasn't flexed. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, you and me both. Bisaccia, was that the guy that the special teams guy? Yeah, now in Green Bay.
And if you know what, the Raiders probably should have kept him on, with all due respect to Josh McDaniels coming in. There you go.
Right, speaking of the Raiders, another primetime game on Monday night with a heavy home favourite. This time the Lions looking to get right, and what better team to get right against, Colin, than Las Vegas?
Yeah, Dan Campbell won the lottery of opportunity, because this is after you had your pants pulled down, you were utterly embarrassed on both sides of the ball. Nothing went right for you. Here is your opportunity. Here is your get right game. You've got to show up. You've got to match their intensity. But this is a great opportunity. I believe, I said it last season, Josh McDaniels would have been out of a job other than the amount of money it costs to get rid of him. And Mark Davis does not have that type of money, because once again, coaching contracts are fully guaranteed in the NFL. Player contracts outside of Sean Watson are not. That's something else that should get highlighted time and until it changes. And the Raiders are stuck. Again, I thought Tyree Wilson would be better than he has been. It hasn't really worked for him. The Raiders have beaten some really bad teams. I don't believe the Lions are a bad team. I think they're a pretty good team. And as long as they show up, they can get things back on track.
Yeah, the Raiders, as we mentioned, somehow found a way to lose to Tyson Bagent and the Bears last week. For me, this team only has 2 players: Devontae Adams, who doesn't want to be there, and Max Crosby, who's doing his level best with the poverty of what's around him and the coaching, as we've been talking about. As you say, Colin, this is the perfect game for Dan Campbell. Fires players up for Jared Goff to shake off a tough game against the Ravens last week. I don't see that there's any way that Detroit doesn't get this done. Brian, any chance of a shock?
No, but I don't think it's going to be as comprehensive as people may think. I think the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo comes back as a serviceable quarterback, I'm not saying he's fantastic. We know he has his flaws and he throws meaningless interceptions at the time, but he can steady the ship and have the offense moving in the right direction. He's been confirmed, but he will be available and active on Monday. I think that can give him a little bit of a boost offensively. It can allow them to put a string of few drives together and keep the game reasonably close. You're talking about betting lines. It's -8. So I think it's a little bit of a stretch. But can they live with the Lions? No, because the Lions need to get back on track offensively. They haven't been at the same level as they have in previous years. They beat the Falcons home 26. And we load up the defense who's played. That's how well they played this season. They need to kind of give us a bit of more on offense. And I think maybe this will be a Monday night, but I don't think it'll be as clear cut. I don't see it like like a shoe in, anything like that. I think it'll be nip and tuck for three quarters and the Lions pull away. Lions get back on track.
All right, that is all 16 games. As we say, we wave goodbye to the bye for 1 week only. There's every team in action heading up to this Halloween. You can catch, of course, those 2 Rams and Cowboys and Bengals and Niners games in Buskers on the Ball in Temple Bar if you're in the vicinity this weekend. And reminding you that there's that new offer from this Sunday and every Sunday, all pints €6 from 6 p.m. Although that this week it's from 5 p.m. to take account of the hour going back and the earlier starts in the NFL games, while daylight saving time kicks in on this side of the Atlantic, but not yet in the US.